Denn nur der große Gegenstand vermag den tieferen Grund der Menschheit aufzuregen. Im engeren Kreis verengert sich sein Sinn. Es wächst der Mensch mit seinen größeren Zwecken. Und jetzt, an des Jahrhunderts ernstem Ende, wo selbst die Wirklichkeit zur Dichtung wird, wo wir den Kampf gewaltiger Naturen und ein bedeutend Ziel vor Augen sehen und um der Menschheit große Gegenstände, um Herrschaft und um Freiheit wird gerungen. Jetzt darf die Kunst auf ihrer Schattenbühne auch höheren Flug versuchen. Ja, sie muss. Soll nicht des Lebens Bühne sie beschämen.
What would Schiller say were he to see us today? The great causes of mankind seem all but overwhelming. World peace and freedom hang in the balance. The less favored part of the world is threatened with extinction for lack of development. Rabid Jacobinism is raging in the southeast regions of the world. Indeed, our entire civilization appears to be in danger. Would Schiller today pass the same judgment he reached on witnessing the Jacobin terror of the French Revolution? That a great moment has found a little people. Because we must find a better answer to this question, Helga Zepp LaRouche founded the International Schiller Institute. Its members in many nations share a fundamental belief in the reason of man and in man's ability to solve even the greatest of crises. In order that those who do not know this great poet should understand why the Institute bears his name, we offer here a brief sketch of the history of his life and work. Let us hold high this extraordinary example of beautiful humanity so that we may raise ourselves upward and with a new, joyous confidence in ourselves, turn toward our great purpose. No one, to our knowledge, more perfectly embodied the humanist ideal of humanity. No one more effectively united the conception of Republican freedom with the principle of poetic beauty than Friedrich Schiller. What Beethoven was for music, Schiller was for poetry. Schiller and Beethoven were the giants of the German classics, infinitely alike in their method of thought, each having established the standards by which all art must henceforth be measured. Schiller was the great Republican poet of freedom, who could adorn the ideal of a nobler, more beautiful mankind in such powerful language that he truly found an infallible key to the most secret recesses of the human soul. Like no other, he could evoke the most tender emotions within his audience, enlarge its heart, and guide it to a level of reason not previously known, because he, like no other, met the challenge he himself posed to every poet.
Alles, was uns geben kann, ist seine Individualität. Diese muss es also wert sein, vor Welt und nach Welt ausgestellt zu werden. Diese seine Individualität so sehr zu veredeln, zur reinsten, herrlichsten Menschheit hinaufzuläutern, ist sein erstes und wichtigstes Geschäft, ehe er es unternehmen darf, die Vortrefflichen zu rühren.
Auch das Schöne muss sterben, das Menschen und Götter bezwinget, nicht die eherne Bruströtes des stygischen Zeus. Einmal nur erweichte die Liebe den Schattenbeherrscher, und an der Schwelle noch, streng, rief er zurück sein Geschenk. Nicht stillt Aphrodite dem schönen Knaben die Wunde, die in den zierlichen Leib grausam der Eber geritzt. Nicht errettet den göttlichen Held die unsterbliche Mutter, wann er, am skeischen Tor fallend, sein Schicksal erfüllt. Aber sie steigt aus dem Meer mit allen Töchtern des Nereus, und die Klage hebt an um den verherrlichten Sohn. Siehe, da weinen die Götter, es weinen die Göttinnen alle, dass das Schöne vergeht, dass das Vollkommene stirbt. Auch ein Klaglied zu sein im Mund der Geliebten ist herrlich, denn das Gemeine geht klanglos zum Orkus hinab.
It is the boundless merit of the German population of his time that they loved Schiller as they never loved any other poet. One contemporary, Heinrich Anschutz, who later acted at the Burgtheater in Vienna, witnessed the premiere performance of The Maid of Orleans in Leipzig.
In einem Freudentaumel strömte Jung und Alt nach dem Schauspielhause. Die Kräftigsten errangen sich die besten Plätze im Parterre. Da tut sich die Tür einer Loge auf und eine lange, schlanke Gestalt tritt an die Logenbrüstung. Er ist es. Schiller ist es, durchläuft es die Räume. Und wie ein Kornfeld vom Winde bewegt, wogt die Masse, um den Angebeteten zu sehen. Kaum kann man sich von dem Anblicke losreißen, um dem Vorspiel und dem ersten Akt der Tragödie zu folgen. Nun bricht das Heidenmädchen auf, um in Orleans das Siegeszeichen zu pflanzen. Der Vorhang senkt sich und ein bacchantischer Jubelruf stürmt durch das Haus: Es lebe Friedrich Schiller! Das Orchester muss mit Pauken und Trompeten sekundieren und nun erhebt sich die rührende Gestalt, um sich mit sichtbarer innerer Bewegung gegen den Zuschauerraum dankend zu verneigen. Von neuem rast der Jubel und nur das Aufrollen des Vorhangs macht dem Aufruhr ein Ende.
Another eyewitness recounts what went on outside in front of the theater after the performance.
Der weite Platz vor dem Schauspielhaus bis hinab zum Ranstädter Tor stand dicht gedrängt voller Menschen. Jetzt trat er heraus und im Nu war eine Gasse gebildet. Stimmen geboten, das Haupt zu entblößen. Und so ging denn der Dichter den kleinen Karl, der sich noch spät im Leben daran erinnerte, an der Hand durch die Menge seiner Bewunderer, die alle mit entblößtem Haupte dastanden, hindurch, während hinten Väter ihre Kinder in die Höhe hoben und riefen: Dieser ist es!
But Schiller's jesting and playful yet exalting impact was not confined to the popular masses. It would require an entire history book to demonstrate how Schiller was probably the most critical influence on all positive subsequent developments in German history. The thinking of the Prussian reformers vom Stein, von Humboldt, Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and many others was decisively shaped by him. It was his ideas which inspired the wars of liberation against Napoleon. And he also influenced the best minds around the world, such as John Quincy Adams, James Fenimore Cooper, and Edgar Allan Poe, to name only a few. One must imagine the electrifying effect of a genius to comprehend Schiller's powerful impact upon his fellow men. For instance, let us hear the words of Wilhelm von Humboldt, the great humanist and creator of the world's best model of education, who lived in Schiller's company for many years and who, with Goethe, was one of the pillars of the Weimar classical period.
Es gibt ein unmittelbares und volleres Wirken eines großen Geistes als durch seine Werke. Diese zeigen nur einen Teil seines Wesens. In die lebendige Erscheinung strömt es rein und vollständig über. Auf eine Art, die sich im Einzelnen nicht nachweisen lässt, welcher selbst der Gedanke nicht zu folgen vermag, wird es aufgenommen von seinen Zeitgenossen und auf die folgenden Geschlechter vererbt.
Only someone who is fortunate enough to have met a truly great man sometime in his life can appreciate the impact a genius has upon his fellow men. The genius puts conceptions of greater clarity into currency, and in 1,000 uncountable ways encourages those around him, and gives a mighty impulse to the development of their own conceptual powers, so that they in turn can kindle those sparks of reason within others. Thus, the genius acts not only through his works, but also through his living influence, acts personally across generations. When such a genius expresses within his own being a universal lawfulness, and in his own characteristic way recapitulates the course of all previous history, then, in Humboldt's view, nothing is more exciting than an investigation of such a human being's life. The written reports of those who had the good fortune to have met Schiller personally contain the most precious testimony of how their contact with him left such a lasting impression that in many cases it altered the course of their entire lives. Never did Germany more closely approach Schiller's ideals than at the time of the Liberation Wars. These were not merely a patriotic uprising against Napoleon's tyranny. They were the result of an enthusiastic Republican constitutional movement. And no one inspired that movement more than the great poet of freedom, Friedrich Schiller. The reformers of Prussia carefully studied Schiller's history of the 30 Years' War and applied its lessons to their battles against Napoleon during the Russian campaign. Gneisenau rehearsed Wallenstein's camp with his soldiers. Countless soldiers visited Schiller's widow to receive lines torn from his poems and kept them in the pockets of their jackets near their hearts so as to strengthen them as they marched into battle.
Im Felde ist der Mann noch adrett, da wird das Herz noch gewogen. Da tritt kein anderer für ihn ein, auf sich selber steht da ganz allein.
When Schiller's writings were banned under the Carlsbad decrees of the reactionary rulers of the Holy Alliance in 1819, they were secretly passed from hand to hand, and his popularity continued to grow. Schiller became the inspiration and hero of youth. His fame soon spread throughout the world, and in 1836, Germans from every part of the world financed the statue made by Thorwaldsen, the first statue ever of a German who was neither prince nor military commander. In 1841, Goethe's assistant, Riemer, wrote,
Schiller ist der Abgott der Jugend, der Liebling der Frauen, das Orakel der Alten. Die Begeisterung des Kriegers in Schlachten und Erstürmungen, die Devise und der Wahlspruch der debattierenden Republikaner.
The Schiller festivals in 1859 still stand as the most powerful, positive political demonstrations ever held in Germany. Schiller's memory was celebrated in countless towns in Germany, but also among all German immigrants in America and elsewhere. In schools, universities, churches, and even in workshops, a loud call rang out for national unity. And there is no doubt that Germany's fate would have taken a far more positive turn had Germany been united as a republic in the spirit of Schiller and not under Bismarck, who followed soon thereafter. German culture, and especially Schiller's popularity, exerted an important influence on America throughout the 19th century. The 100th anniversary of Schiller's death in 1905 marked yet another Schiller Renaissance, but it was also the last time when German culture was considered a genuine ingredient of America's heritage. Before, it was largely suppressed by Teddy Roosevelt and the First World War. But as long as America remains separated from Schiller by ideological barriers, it will also remain separated from its own soul. For no other poet had immortalized the ideals of the American Revolution in such a grand manner as he did. The founding fathers of the American Revolution set down in the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. It is this magnificent formulation of a political constitution founded upon natural law that Schiller cast in dramatic form in the famous scene of the Rütli Oath in William Tell. Stauffacher exclaims,
Nein, eine Grenze hat Tyrannenmacht. Wenn der Gedrückte nirgends Recht kann finden, wenn unerträglich wird die Last, greift er hinauf getrosten Mutes in den Himmel und holt herunter seine ewigen Rechte, die droben hangen, unveräußerlich und unzerbrechlich, wie die Sterne selbst. Der alte Urstand der Natur kehrt wieder, wo Mensch dem Menschen gegenübersteht, zum letzten Mittel, wenn kein anderes mehr verfangen will, ist ihm das Schwert gegeben. Der Güter Höchstes dürfen wir verteidigen gegen Gewalt. Wir stehen vor unser Land. Wir stehen vor unsere Weiber, unsere Kinder. Wir stehen vor unsere Weiber, unsere Kinder.
Friedrich Schiller was born on November 10, 1759, in Marbach on the Neckar River. He spent an extremely happy childhood there, and also later in Lorsch, and then at the Latin School in Ludwigsburg. His happiness was only interrupted when Karl Eugen, the Duke of Württemberg, moved him into the Karlsschule, the ducal military academy. Although Schiller suffered immensely at the school, where he had to stay from his 13th to his 21st year, the influences which flowed in upon him during that time became a wellspring from which his poetic genius would later explode. On the more positive side, his mind developed under the influence, still felt in the 18th century, of Leibniz, Shakespeare, and Lessing. And conspicuous among his teachers was a professor of philosophy, Friedrich Abel, who polemically challenged his students to develop into geniuses. Schiller developed a passionate aversion to the oligarchical despotism of the nobility, who brutally and thoughtlessly crushed the aspirations of their subjects, and who would carelessly squander their peasants' entire year's work if it pleased them to stage a hunt with 300 horses. In these early years, Schiller developed an absolutely uncompromising disgust for every form of philistinism and mediocrity, an attitude without which he would have never attained greatness. But he also developed acute political insight, enabling him to expose the most intricate and covert operations run by the oligarchical faction of his time. And he shed ever new light upon them in such works as The Ghost Seer, or his The Jesuit Government of Paraguay, or in his poem The Evil Monarchs, to name only a few. With that unique insight exclusive to genius, he exposed every method of psychological warfare, every activity they directed against the idea of Republican freedom. Whoever reads his works today will quickly discover to his great amazement that these forces remain essentially unchanged to this day. In his first drama, The Robbers, secretly written by the 20-year-old Schiller when he was still in the Karlsschule, a dramatic talent erupted that has no parallel in the German language. Schiller's fellow students, who secretly attended the first performance of The Robbers, excitedly acted out entire scenes at night in the woods. This drama established Schiller's fame throughout Germany at one stroke, and soon throughout Europe. While dramas greater than The Robbers were to follow, Schiller had already demonstrated what it was that distinguished him from all other playwrights: his ability to compose in such a gripping way that each line is born of necessity from the previous one, so that it is impossible to put down one of his dramas, no matter how many times one might have to read it, not to speak of the overwhelming effect of his dramas performed on the stage, which only a fool could possibly evade.
His Serene Highness begs your ladyship's acceptance of these jewels as a nuptial present. They have just arrived from Vienna.
And what did your Duke pay for these stones?
They didn't cost him a penny.
What? Are you mad? Nothing? Old man, you fix on me a look as though you would pierce me through. And these monstrously expensive stones cost nothing, you say?
Yesterday, 7,000 of the land's children left for America. They are paying for everything.
When Duke Karl Eugen forbade Schiller to write, forbade him any contact with foreign countries, and even arrested him so that Schiller must have thought he would soon share the same horrible fate as the poet Schubart, he decided to flee. His good friend, the composer and later collaborator of Beethoven, Andreas Streicher, made great sacrifices to help Schiller escape. These experiences were woven into Schiller's third drama, Cabals and Love, the first play in which he makes direct reference to the American Revolution. Not only did he put the entire duplicity and perfidy of contemporary life at court ruthlessly upon the stage, here he also attacks the sale of Hessian soldiers to the English, who were in the habit of throwing such soldiers as cannon fodder into the war against the renegade American colonies. But even the English could not prevent some of those soldiers from deserting to the side of the young American Republic. Cabals and Love was to be Schiller's last drama to make such drastic references to his own time. The play was immediately forbidden after its premiere performance, and a flood of letters attacking the poet flew back and forth between the authorities. From the Prussian to the Bavarian court, the word was that this dangerous subject would have to be neutralized and prevented from obtaining any employment. To escape censorship, Schiller never wrote another drama dealing with his own time. Instead, he used the trick of shifting the great affairs of the present to earlier historical times. But all of his many subsequent works, ranging from dramas, poems, historical to theoretical works, were still born by the great idea of political freedom, and they all mirrored the ideals successfully realized in the American Revolution, ideals that united all of Europe's ardent patriots. After Schiller had escaped from his personal difficulties with the aid of Christian Gottfried Kerner in Leipzig, whose house was a gathering place for Republican networks, he was filled with optimism about the future of mankind. It was in Kerner's house that Schiller composed the world-famous lines,
Freude, schöner Götterfunken, Tochter aus Elysium, wir betreten feuertrunken Himmlische, dein Heiligtum. Deine Zauber binden wieder, was die Mode streng geteilt. Alle Menschen werden Brüder, wo dein sanfter Flügel weilt.
For 30 years, Beethoven had been ruminating over the idea of creating a composition of this poem. In his view, it was a relatively simple matter to compose music to poems like those of Goethe. But Schiller's poetry was already of such high quality that he would be hard put to add to them through music. Finally, he wrote down his choral fantasy, which can be rightfully described as an homage to Schiller. Accept then, ye beautiful souls, these gifts of glorious art. And at long last, with his Ninth Symphony, he created one of the most powerful compositions of all time. Schiller's poem appeared in 1786, in that very decade when all Europe's Republicans were gazing full of enthusiasm upon the successful American Revolution, a success in which they had a large share through the networks of Lafayette, Steuben, and the League of Armed Neutrality. The American Revolution had really been their joint project to establish for the first time a free republic in the New World. They hoped that the beginning of the French Revolution would take a similarly happy turn, that this would act as a lever for all of Europe, so that Germany, too, which was still a collection of 300 small principalities, could become a nation. In his letters on Don Carlos, Schiller describes discussions on this perspective as the favorite topic of the decade, the establishment of a new nation, wherein the utmost flourishing of the state would coincide with a maximum development of the individual. The drama Don Carlos, along with William Tell, is perhaps his most direct celebration of the American Revolution, of the Republican principle. Even though the scene of Don Carlos is shifted to the court of Philip II of Spain, when the Marquis of Posa takes up the cause of justice for the province of Flanders, this emissary of mankind speaks, in ideal form, the words which also move the founding fathers. When Philip hears the Marquis refuse to become a servant of princes, and the king attempts to force him into his service, the Marquis seizes the opportunity to hurl the truth directly at the most powerful monarch of his time.
Ja, beim Allmächtigen. Ja. Ja, ich wiederhole es. Geben Sie, was Sie uns nahmen, wieder. Lassen Sie großmütig, wieder Starke, Menschenglück aus Ihrem Füllhorn strömen, Geister reifen in Ihrem Weltgebäude. Geben Sie, was Sie uns nahmen, wieder. Werden Sie von Millionen Königen ein König. Oh, könnte die Beredsamkeit von allen den Tausenden, die dieser großen Stunde teilhaftig sind, auf meinen Lippen schweben, den Strahl, den ich in diesen Augen merke, zur Flamme zu erheben. Geben Sie die unnatürliche Vergötterung auf, die uns vernichtet. Werden Sie uns Muster des Ewigen und Wahren. Niemals, niemals besaß ein Sterblicher so viel, so göttlich, es zu gebrauchen. Alle Könige Europens huldigen dem spanischen Namen. Gehen Sie Europens Königen voran, ein Federzug von dieser Hand, und neu erschaffen wird die Erde. Geben Sie Gedankenfreiheit.
Yet Schiller's dramas are far more than a celebration. They are really strategic studies containing universal truths, revealing the mistakes that Republicans simply must not make if victory is to be theirs. In the case of the Marquis of Posa, for example, his mistake is flight forward. Embroiled in a complicated plot, the Marquis flees forward, first to save the prince, Don Carlos by sacrificing himself, but also, as Schiller points out, so that by sacrificing himself, he can remain pure. But by doing so, the Marquis has lost precisely what had to be won, freedom for Flanders. Time and again, Schiller's dramas demonstrate how a man's duty lies above his own personal inclinations, how he must be both a patriot and a world citizen, which can never imply a contradiction, for the true interest of any one nation can never be at odds with the interests of the world as a whole. Schiller's dramatic method is at the same time a method of education to reason, not didactically, with a raised moralizing finger, but rather by forcibly confronting the individuals on the stage with the great cause of mankind, which elevates men even as it crushes them. In his prologue to The Bride of Messina, Schiller remarks that
Die wahre Kunst aber hat es nicht bloß auf ein vorübergehendes Spiel abgesehen, es ist ihr Ernst damit, den Menschen nicht bloß in einen augenblicklichen Traum von Freiheit zu versetzen, sondern ihn wirklich frei zu machen. Und dies dadurch, dass sie eine Kraft in ihm erweckt, übt und ausbildet, die sinnliche Welt, die sonst nur als ein roher Stoff auf uns lastet, als eine blinde Macht auf uns drückt, in eine objektive Ferne zu rücken, in ein freies Werk unseres Geistes zu verwandeln und das Materielle durch Ideen zu beherrschen.
In another place, Schiller says,
Die Schaubühne ist der gemeinschaftliche Kanal, in welchem von dem denkenden, besseren Teil des Volkes das Licht der Weisheit herunterströmt und von da aus in milderen Strahlen durch den ganzen Staat sich verbreitet. Richtigere Begriffe, geläuterte Grundsätze, reinere Gefühle fließen von hier aus durch alle Adern des Volkes. Der Nabel der Barbarei, des finsteren Aberglaubens schwindet. Die Nacht weicht dem siegenden Licht.
Schiller was not only the greatest German dramatist, he also developed a philosophy of history that has not been surpassed to this day in its high principles and its truth of insight.
Unser menschliches Jahrhundert herbeizuführen, haben sich, ohne es zu wissen oder zu erzielen, alle vorhergehenden Zeitalter angestrengt. Unser sind alle Schätze, welche Fleiß und Genie, Vernunft und Erfahrung im langen Alter der Welt endlich heimgebracht haben. Aus der Geschichte erst werden Sie lernen, einen Wert auf die Güter zu legen, denen Gewohnheit und unangefochtener Besitz so gern unsere Dankbarkeit rauben. Kostbare, teure Güter, an denen das Blut der Besten und Edelsten klebt, die durch die schwere Arbeit zu vieler Generationen haben errungen werden müssen. Und welcher unter ihnen, bei dem sich ein heller Geist mit einem empfindenden Herzen gattet, könnte dieser hohen Verpflichtung eingedenk sein, ohne dass sich ein stiller Wunsch in ihm regt, an das kommende Geschlecht die Schuld zu entrichten, die er dem Vergangenen nicht mehr abtragen kann. Ein edles Verlangen muss in uns entglühen, zu dem reichen Vermächtnis von Wahrheit, Sittlichkeit und Freiheit, das wir von der Vorwelt übernahmen und reich vermehrt an die Folgewelt wieder abgeben müssen, auch aus unseren Mitteln einen Beitrag zu legen und an dieser unvergänglichen Kette, die durch alle Menschengeschlechter sich windet, unser fliehendes Dasein zu befestigen. Wie verschieden auch die Bestimmung sei, die in der bürgerlichen Gesellschaft sie erwartet. Etwas dazusteuern können sie alle. Jedem Verdienst ist eine Bahn zur Unsterblichkeit aufgetan. Zu der wahren Unsterblichkeit, meine ich. wo die Tat lebt und weitereilt, wenn auch der Name ihres Urhebers hinter ihr zurückbleiben sollte.
In the same year of 1789, when Schiller delivered that inaugural address as professor of history in Jena, he also composed a poem called The Artists, a hymn to the reason of man.
Wie schön, o Mensch, mit deinem Palmenzweige, stehst du an des Jahrhunderts Neige, in edler, stolzer Männlichkeit. Mit aufgeschlossenem Sinn, mit Geistesfülle, voll milden Ernsts, in tatenreicher Stille, der reifste Sohn der Zeit. Frei durch Vernunft, stark durch Gesetze, durch Sanftmut groß und reich durch Schätze, die lange Zeit dein Busen dir verschwieg. Herr der Natur, die deine Fesseln liebet, die deine Kraft in 1000 Kämpfen übet und prangend unter dir aus der Verwilderung stieg.
When Schiller wrote those lines, he was still firmly convinced that mankind stood on the threshold of the age of reason. But as the Jacobin terror began to crush the hopes offered by the French Revolution, he increasingly vented his horror at that scene of barbarity. And so Schiller, who had just composed the lines, "How beautifully, O man, with your branch of palm, you stand on the century's slope," later reflected upon the Paris massacre in The Sons of the Bell. Yet the most terrifying of terrors is man in his folly. The outcome of the French Revolution occasioned Schiller to make his famous remark that a great moment has found a little people. Since for the moment there was no hope of establishing a political order in Europe based on the principles of reason and freedom, Schiller turned his attention to the question of how this little people could now be educated. His aesthetic letters deal with this issue and proceed from the thesis that any improvement in political affairs can only result from an improvement in the character of individuals. Many other invaluable works, such as On Grace and Dignity, deal with the same subject. Schiller attributes the most decisive role to art itself. Art can never be a mere ornament or a passing mood. It must be the expression of a higher lawfulness and of freedom at the same time. But how can the artist predetermine the effect of a work of art upon his audience without himself violating that principle of freedom? Schiller's challenge to artists is the greatest one conceivable. The poet must have extinguished the individual within himself and have elevated himself to his species' character. Only thus is he capable of formulating a universal truth which can win the reader to a higher order of thought. This period of the early 1790s also saw Schiller's reckoning with the work of Immanuel Kant, whose categorical imperative required that man must do his duty should any contradiction between necessity and inclination arise. Such a Kantian approach necessarily aroused the indignation of our freedom-loving poet, and so he wrote, "What crime have the children of the house committed, that he cares only for the servants?" Schiller counterposed the Kantian fulfillment of duty to the idea of the beautiful soul, an emotional condition in which reason and sensuousness, duty and inclination coincide. We call a soul beautiful when its moral sense of all human experience has become so steadfast that it can confidently let its emotions serve to guide its own will, without any risk of coming into contradiction with its own decisions. The individual actions of the beautiful soul are therefore not moral in themselves, but rather are so by virtue of its entire nature. No single one of its actions can be counted as a specific merit, since the mere satisfaction of an impulse could never be called meritorious. The beautiful soul possesses no other merit than its own existence. It performs humanity's most odious duties with the ease of someone acting out of pure instinct, and the most heroic sacrifices it extracts from its natural impulse appear to the observer as the mere free play of that impulse. Hence, the beautiful soul is never cognizant of the beauty of its own acts. It no longer occurs to it that one could act and feel otherwise. There were so much more, infinitely more to quote from Schiller, so much more to say about him. But let this brief sketch be a stimulus for those who wish to read and study Schiller for themselves. Just as Schiller set forth a program for his own era to elevate endangered and ruined humanity through classical art, by reaching back to the heritage of the Greeks, today we too must link up with the ideal of mankind set forth in the Weimar classics in order to unfold anew the whole of human nature with Schiller's method. If we leave all the confusion of later history to one side and ourselves become those honest discoverers whom Schiller once hoped for, we will then have found the key to overcoming the inner fissures of modern man. But not only this, if we learn to think great thoughts, as Schiller did, we will have also found the strength to master the great causes of mankind today. Great is he who overcomes the terrifying. Man is greater than his fate.
Den tieferen Grund der Menschheit aufzuregen. Im engeren Kreis verengert sich sein Sinn. Es wächst der Mensch mit seinen größeren Zwecken. Und jetzt, an des Jahrhunderts ernstem Ende, wo selbst die Wirklichkeit zur Dichtung wird, wo wir den Kampf gewaltiger Naturen und ein bedeutend Ziel vor Augen sehen und um der Menschheit große Gegenstände, um Herrschaft und um Freiheit wird gerungen. Jetzt darf die Kunst auf ihrer Schattenbühne auch höheren Flug versuchen. Ja, sie muss. Soll nicht des Lebens Bühne sie beschämen.
What would Schiller say were he to see us today? The great causes of mankind seem all but overwhelming. World peace and freedom hang in the balance. The less favored part of the world is threatened with extinction for lack of development. Rabid Jacobinism is raging in the southeast regions of the world. Indeed, our entire civilization appears to be in danger. Would Schiller today pass the same judgment he reached on witnessing the Jacobin terror of the French Revolution? That a great moment has found a little people. Because we must find a better kind in such powerful language that he truly found an infallible key to the most secret recesses of the human soul. Like no other, he could evoke the most tender emotions within his audience, enlarge its heart, and guide it to a level of reason not previously known, because he, like no other, met the challenge he himself posed to every poet.
Alles, was uns geben kann, ist seine Individualität. Diese muss es also wert sein, vor Welt und nach Welt ausgestellt zu werden. Diese seine Individualität so sehr zu veredeln, zur reinsten, herrlichsten Menschheit hinaufzuläutern, ist sein erstes und wichtigstes Geschäft, ehe er es unternehmen darf, die Vortrefflichen zu rühren.
Auch das Schöne muss sterben, das Menschen und Götter bezwinget, nicht die eherne Bruströtes des stygischen Zeus. Einmal nur erweichte die Liebe den Denn nur der große Gegenstand vermag.
Answer to this question. Helga Zepp LaRouche founded the International Schiller Institute. Its members in many nations share a fundamental belief in the reason of man and in man's ability to solve even the greatest of crises. In order that those who do not know this great poet should understand why the Institute bears his name, we offer here a brief sketch of the history of his life and work. Let us hold high this extraordinary example of beautiful humanity so that we may raise ourselves upward and with a new, joyous confidence in ourselves, turn toward our great purpose. No one, to our knowledge, more perfectly embodied the humanist ideal of humanity. No one more effectively united the conception of Republican freedom with the principle of poetic beauty than Friedrich Schiller. What Beethoven was for music, Schiller was for poetry. Schiller and Beethoven were the giants of the German classics, infinitely alike in their method of thought, each having established the standards by which all art must henceforth be measured. Schiller was the great Republican poet of freedom, who could adorn the ideal of a nobler, more beautiful man.
Schattenbeherrscher. Und an der Schwelle noch, streng, rief er zurück sein Geschenk. Nicht stillt Aphrodite dem schönen Knaben die Wunde, die in den zierlichen Leib grausam der Eber geritzt. Nicht errettet den göttlichen Held die unsterbliche Mutter, wann er, am skeischen Tor fallend, sein Schicksal erfüllt. Aber sie steigt aus dem Meer mit allen Töchtern des Nereus, und die Klage hebt an um den verherrlichten Sohn. Siehe, da weinen die Götter, es weinen die Göttinnen alle, dass das Schöne vergeht, dass das Vollkommene stirbt. Auch ein Klaglied zu sein im Mund der Geliebten ist herrlich, denn das Gemeine geht klanglos zum Orkus hinab.
It is the boundless merit of the German population of his time that they loved Schiller as they never loved any other poet. One contemporary, Heinrich Anschutz, who later acted at the Burgtheater in Vienna, witnessed the premiere performance of The Maid of Orleans in Leipzig.
In einem Freudentaumel strömte Jung und Alt nach dem Schauspielhause. Die Kräftigsten errangen sich die besten Plätze im Parterre. Da tut sich die Tür einer Loge auf und eine lange, schlanke Gestalt tritt an die Logenbrüstung. Er ist es. Schiller ist es, durchläuft es die Räume. Und wie ein Korn